So the level 1 core classes, there are 4 different specialties, and then there's a fifth. There's actually 5, but there's 4 specialties, and then there's a fifth that brings them all together, and that is the area or the specialty of leadership and teamwork. So the 4 specialties or paths are primitive engineer, combat medic, hunter-gatherer, and scout or spy. Let's talk about those. Starting with the primitive engineer. The primitive engineer is the aspect of the intellect. It is the aspect of problem solving. So the primitive engineer is the problem solver and the engineer of a team, if you think of it as a team person, or in a community, if it's in a community. And so what the primitive engineer does is that basically their job is to make everything easier and more efficient that the team has to do in the first place. So this can range across a wide spectrum of different skills. But in general, the primitive engineer learns off-grid engineering, levers, pulleys, obviously rope work, lashing, winches, basic things like that, as well as things like pumps, learning commo, antenna theory, all the things that go in logistics, transportation, all the things that go into what we would consider both pre- and post-industrial engineering concepts. And we do it all from the standpoint of sustainable, salvage-based engineering. We don't go out and buy brand new stuff and open up packages and call that engineering. You have to understand how to build things from the ground up. Most of our power is 12 volt. We work with that more than anything. As an example, the primitive engineers, I'll give you, for each of these specialties, I'll give you the example of what they would do in a mission-oriented. So we teach at a lecture, we teach by experiential hands-on, we teach by having scenarios where we pump up the adrenaline a little bit and we have opposing forces or force-on-force type situations, and most importantly, we teach by having actual real-world missions. So for each of these specialties, let me give you a brief synopsis of what they would do in a real-world mission, and I can actually tell you exactly what the primitive engineer did last year, for instance. In remote Nicaragua, when we took our team up there, our herbal medics, into remote Nicaragua last year, the primitive engineers took care of the water purification. So what they did was they built slow sand filters, a 3-barrel system for slow sand filtration of the horrible water conditions that they had there. And they also built pumping mechanisms, what's called a rope pump, for a manual pump for about a 40-foot well that the villagers were just only lowering a bucket for. So in other words, pumping, and then also worked on, we weren't able to implement it because we didn't have time, but they worked very heavily on also bicycle-powered pumps, bicycle-powered power generation, 12-volt 12-volt charging off of a bicycle power. They worked a lot on some wind generation for 12-volt power. They worked on commo because we didn't know exactly what we were going to have time to do. So they worked on commo. We were going to antenna theory and setting up CB commo between 2 villages that were there. Unfortunately, all they had time to do really was teach, educate, and build out of salvage material now. Again, all salvage. They built the slow sand filtration and the rope pump for the well, which is actually quite a bit. It was a lot of work. In 2.5 days, they did a huge amount of work and involved the villagers and did a lot of teaching. That's the primitive engineer. That's an example of what a primitive engineer would do in a mission, and that's only a few examples of many things that they would do. Again, mostly pre- and post-industrial off-grid engineering using salvage mostly. The next specialty is the combat medic. So combat medic could be thought of as the aspect of the body. So the relationship between ourselves and our body. And that includes both how to help the body and how to hurt the body. In other words, from a self-defense standpoint, how to use the body to protect yourself and how to hurt somebody else if you have to, or at least stop somebody from hurting you. So there's a self-defense or martial arts aspect of that, close quarters combat, tactics, gun, stick, and knife aspects to that. And the other side of that coin is how to help the body. So we learn medicine, and that medicine is very, very specific to what I call ditch medicine, which is my own background as a Special Forces medic. Ditch medicine and wilderness first aid. Understanding wilderness first aid, of course, we have wilderness first aid certification, a 16-hour and a 32-hour, and then hundreds of hours of curriculum in herbal medicine or plant medicine. So we learn the local medicine, local ecology, local medicine in our area, Central Texas as well as Southwest and South regional type medicinal plants, as well as plants all around the country and even all around the world. But mostly, how do we use those? How do we work with that? How do we set up a clinic? So, as an example, the combat medics were responsible in the last example last year in Nicaragua, in remote Nicaragua, for setting up the clinic. So we had an herbal clinic where in 2.5 days we saw about 200 people, and we worked with a wide variety of different ranges of illnesses, chronic as well as acute, some injuries, some things that were referred to surgery for a surgical team that came down on our heels about 3 weeks after us. But mostly things that we can deal with herbs, of course. The things that we could deal with and we could actually work with is what we worked with, which was probably about 90% of what we saw we were able to affect very well and very positively using medicinal plants, as well as teaching. Again, this all goes back to self-sustainability. Teaching these people that we were working with, the remote villages that we were working with, how to work with plants themselves, and showing them that plant medicine is an aspect that they could use themselves to be able to take care of themselves. So it all comes back again to teaching, just like the primitive engineers were teaching them how to create their own water purification system. The combat medics were teaching them how to work with herbs and plant medicine in order to be able to take care of themselves. So it's not just something where they're dependent on somebody else, but actually bringing medicine to the people. The next specialty I want to talk about is the hunter-gatherer. The hunter-gatherer actually is divided into two areas, very specifically, unlike the combat medic and the primitive engineer, where really the primitive and the urban overlap. In the hunter-gatherer, we really have to separate them out. So we have an urban hunter-gatherer and we have a primitive hunter-gatherer, and those are two separate paths, two separate core paths. So if you want to do the urban hunter-gatherer, you have to take the urban core first and then go to urban hunter-gatherer. And same with primitive. So let's talk about them both real briefly. The primitive hunter-gatherer, both the hunter-gatherers basically represent the relationship between ourselves and our environment. So if you want to learn primitive hunting and gathering, you would learn all the aspects of primitive hunting, primitive fishing, working with fire, of course, friction fire, advanced friction fire. Of course, in the core basic, you get some basic friction fire, but you learn more about fire and heat, cooking, shelter, cordage, tanning, hide tanning, brain tanning, basket and container making, clay, stone and stone tools, flint knapping, tracking, all of the things that go into what you would consider primitive skills. So they're the classic primitive skills that you would normally get in a normal survival school. If you can find a good survival school that teaches you really in-depth primitive skills, we get as in-depth as any school anywhere in the world teaching you all of these skills and more, because we're able to subdivide them out both through core classes as well as electives, of course. So that's the primitive hunter-gatherer. Now the urban hunter-gatherer is a little different. The urban hunter-gatherer is all about the same things in terms of survival, but really from a standpoint of growing and working with your own food, so and water, and even shelter. But so basically, we focus mostly on food and water, and so this gets into what we call guerrilla gardening, urban gardening, permaculture concepts, aquaponics, rabbitry, and small, animal husbandry. Butchering or harvesting animals, preserving that food. Now we get into preserving in the primitive as well, but it's a different kind of preserving, because it's preserving in a primitive environment. Well, in the urban, we get into preserving food in more of an urban environment. So we're using power, and we're using the things that we have available in an urban environment to be able to preserve food, for instance. Different types of gardening, raised bed gardening and wicking beds and hugelkultur and all of the things that go into different types of gardening, growing our own food and living off of the land that we are cultivating. So obviously lots and lots of recycling type concepts. Again, this is very self-sustainability, composting, vermiculture, black soldier fly larvae, all the different things that go into being able to grow and sustain yourself in an urban environment using all of these different types of sustainable techniques. That's the urban hunter-gatherer. Now the final core specialty that I want to talk about is the scout or spy. This is divided into two parts, an urban and a primitive component. And the reason for that is there's just so much information between those two areas that we have to divide it out. So we have a primitive scout and we have an urban scout. The urban scout could really be called spy as well. So, as you can imagine, what the scout really relates to and is the relationship between yourself and your mind. And that involves things like awareness, that involves intuition, that involves being able to work with other people and understand what they're about. So, social engineering. And so, let's talk a little bit about the primitive scout. The primitive scout works, of course, in a primitive, more of a primitive environment. There's some overlap with the primitive scout and the primitive hunter-gatherer in terms of some of the primitive skills. But mostly it's about stealth, it's about awareness, it's about blending, camouflage, reconnaissance, long-distance terrain negotiation, a lot of advanced land navigation and orienteering type stuff, being able to both read a map as well as draw a map. Works into security as well. Just like the combat medic works into security more in a close range, the scout is really more of a far range, distance range type of security, as well as just a constant security that you would expect. Basically, you can think of the scout, describe the scout as the eyes and the ears of the team. So in every aspect that relates to. So gathering information from all those different areas, and that means also sometimes being stealthy and sometimes being hidden, and sometimes that means being right in the middle of things and still hidden, but hidden in plain view. The urban scout, very similar, but in just an urban baseline instead of a primitive baseline. So a lot of social engineering, a lot of learning how to work, hide, be the gray man, blend into an urban baseline, urban caches, urban survival. In terms of where you're of overnighting and staying and being able to move and routes, egress and ingress routes through urban areas. Again, mainly social engineering and mainly things that allow you to be the eyes and the ears of a team in an urban environment. And finally, just one quick note about the fifth specialty, which is leadership and teamwork. This is not necessarily something we teach separately, although eventually we might. But in general, these classes, the concept of leadership gets pulled into every class, starting with the core basics, gets pulled in a little bit. We give little, ideas, give coaching, give concepts, overviews as to how, what different types of leadership there are, and then we work it in to the team really through scenario play. So having scenarios that are a lot of times have a little bit of adrenaline involved. They have opposing forces involved. They're the type of thing that it takes more than just standing up and telling people what to do. There's a lot more involved in our leadership and teamwork, and so people understand by the end that in order to be a good leader, they have to be also a good team member. So leadership and teamwork really pulls everything together, and it's the relationship between ourselves and ourselves. It's basically the relationship is man and how we interact with each other on a community level, and how we work together, both on a team and as a community. So let me talk just a little bit about the peripheral classes now. I talked all about the core. The peripheral classes are classes, again, that anybody can take. You don't have to go through the core steps. So if you want to take the core classes, anybody can take those, but you've got to start with the core basic. With the peripheral classes, you don't have to take a core basic or anything like that. You can just come in and take the peripheral classes. What are some of those peripheral classes? As an example, the herbology, all the herbology classes are peripheral classes. Now, if you're a combat medic, you have to take those herbology classes, so it's like having to take it sort of like a required elective, but they're open to anybody. These electives are open to anybody, so anybody can come and just take herbology. You don't have to be a combat medic core student in order to do that. Again, there's several hundred hours of herbology classes. We have tracking certification, tracking that is based and geared towards certification in the Cyber Tracker certification program, which is the gold standard for tracking certification in the world, not just the United States, but the world. We have wilderness first aid certification. That's even though it's a required elective for combat medics, it's open to anybody. We have things like blacksmithing and knife making. Those are peripheral classes. Anybody can take those. Basic welding and homesteading type classes. I say welding, any kind of skills that go along with homesteading. We try to have different skills throughout the year of that. Different types of skills on food preservation, like dry canning and wet canning. And we have events get-togethers where we're doing that, where everybody just shows up with the food. They might want a dry can. We have a dry canner, and everybody brings their food, and they just pay, the cost of the cans, and they can can their own food. So it's a cheap way for people to be able to work on preparedness in their own home. And we do some preparedness classes that are electives, bug out bag type stuff, events that are related to that are open to everybody. We do a number of other. We do hog harvesting. How do you harvest a hog? And we actually do that, and you take home the meat. We do brain tanning. That's open to everybody. We do stave bow making. So in other words, bow making from staves. We do lumber bow making. So bow making from lumber. We do primitive bows that are not stave or lumber bows, but actual primitive bows that, of course, don't last nearly as long, but just a quick bow that you can make in an hour or so. Intuitive archery classes with that. We do different types of fitness classes that are open to everybody, whether it's more the combat, like mixed martial art types fitness, or whether it's more scout type fitness, where it's long distance, it's agility, it's distance, it's endurance. We do a number of peripheral classes that are throughout the year. We have small classes, short, like 2-hour classes sometimes, that might cover just small subjects like herbal antibiotics or herbal antimicrobials, or again, bug out bag, or urban survival. Urban escape innovation, little things like that. Small, short classes that are all peripheral classes throughout the year that we do. So there are a number of peripheral classes at any given time that you can find at our school. And going to the website, of course, will give you a really good idea as to what's up. The best place to check that out is either the calendar or some of the different listings we have right off the front page in terms of our different peripheral classes, our different elective classes that you can get. And it's a really good way to get into our community and take some of these classes and just check it out. It's not as much a time commitment or a money commitment as coming into a core class and doing a core basic, but it gives you a really good chance to just come in, even if it's only for a couple-hour class, and check out whoever's instructing it, check out our instructors, maybe myself, for instance, and see how you like the instruction, how you like what we're doing, how much you learned, and hopefully come back. We have over a 90% return rate on all of our students. We stand behind quality of everything we teach. And we believe very strongly that all our teachers are very, very, very committed to what they teach, myself included. I'm the one that founded this. I founded it off of these principles, and I used to teach all the classes, and now I've been able to finally expand and pull in other teachers and pull them in through my vision, pulling them in through my courses so they can understand the vision, and everybody has the same vision in our school. We are a large community. We believe very strongly in community. So when you come in and you start taking our classes, you really become part of our community, and that is very important to us. It's much more important. I'm not interested in just teaching people who wander back off and do their own thing. I'm interested in teaching leaders, and I'm interested in teaching teachers and people who want to contribute to the community. This is why we run missions through Herbal Medics, which I have another introductory video specifically to Herbal Medics that you can check that out. Herbal Medics is a nonprofit, and the whole concept behind that is being able to give back to other communities. So, for instance, I gave the example of remote Nicaragua, and being able to help that community at the same time also giving our students real-world experience. So when they come back from someplace like remote Nicaragua, they've actually done a lot of that kind of stuff that if they had to do it here because of a disaster or whatever, they've already been there and done that. Now they've done it. They've really done it. They haven't just faked it or done it in a scenario, which scenarios are good, but they're not the real thing. So it's very important to me that we do real missions from the standpoint of being able to help the community, and by that I mean the global community, as well as being able to give our students all kinds of real-world experience. So every one of those aspects of the core components, the 4 core components I gave you, 5, including leadership, every one of them are things that are brought out and that are used in real-world missions. So scouts, we have to have scouts that go down into an area. Another thing that I didn't mention about scouts is they have to learn language. They need to be able to understand how to learn a language quickly. We teach that. How do you learn a foreign language? And so we work with a lot of Spanish, for instance. The other thing is security, long distance security. So a scout might go down and check an area out. Our scouts might go down and check out a post-disaster or a remote area, see what needs to be done there, see what the security issues might be, see what the routes in are, what the routes out are, and they'll be able to give us that feedback and that information for us to prepare the rest of the team to go in. Hunter-gatherers take care of the food and water. They might be taking care of the food, teaching food preservation. They might be doing the urban hunter-gatherer and teaching food, growing your own food, gardening, composting, all the types of things that go into being self-sustainable. Primitive engineers are doing the things that I mentioned before, like water purification or pumping or communication and all those types of things. And then, of course, the combat medics are taking care of setting up clinics and working with people from a clinical standpoint, especially using herbal or plant medicines. So that, in a nutshell, is how we kind of combine all of the core and the peripheral classes together in a training environment. That we have lecture, of course, we have hands-on, of course. We probably, in most classes that you start off with at a basic level, they're at least 50% hands-on, at least, sometimes more like 60 or 70% hands-on. And then we move into scenarios and put you into scenarios. And then we actually have a real-world or a mission-oriented component to this, where you really actually get to use this information and use these skills and do so in a very challenging environment, do so as a team. And not only learn, but also come closer a lot, become a lot closer to people who have very similar, probably very similar vision to you, in terms of what they believe, what they would like to see happen with our species and with our human race, and on their own, and form their own community, even outside of the school. So that, in a nutshell, is how I would describe the human path, and in this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions at all, of course, you can check out thehumanpath.com and get more information, or you can email us at info@thehumanpath.com. Feel free to email anytime and ask any questions. We always get back to email. We always answer every question that we get. We might not do it right away. We teach every weekend, and sometimes 3-day weekends, and sometimes we teach in the evenings as well. So we might be kind of busy, but we will always reply to every email as well. Thank you very much for watching, and hope to see you out of the class. Bye.